State schools facing bankruptcy and closure over existential funding threat. We're going to read into this exclusive from iNews, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Reganelite here with an exclusive from iNews with the headline of State schools are facing bankruptcy and closure over existential funding threat. The exclusive reveals that the current spending plans mean a very serious risk that some schools will simply cease to be viable, a head teacher tells the Eye. Guys, while you're here, before I give my initial thoughts, if you can hit the like button and share it across social media so others are notified of this video. This is sadly something that I feared that was coming down the pathway, simply because we know that state schools have been struggling with funding in parts of the country as it is. I'm talking about England specifically here, and we know that when it comes to certain procurements, certain things, these schools are just not getting the adequate equipment and processes they need to be able to teach the kids what they need to teach. We know that classroom sizes have become bigger over the last 14 years, which means that kids getting some of that one-to-one really does matter. And there are many cases where kids are just not getting that education they need. Now, this is not I want to stress this really important. This is not the fault of the teachers, okay? It is how the funding is put into the schools, and is the funding that's been allocated by government been enough. Now, we also have to remind ourselves that in the last 14 years of austerity, we've had austerity for 14 years. Cuts everywhere. Cuts in education, cuts in healthcare, cuts in crime, cuts in everywhere. Everything has had cuts. Now, education is another one of them. Education is the bedrock of any country of anywhere, guys. Education is what teaches our children and gets them ready for the future. And these schools, whatever your position is on schools, we need them. They are vital. They are important to the future of our next generation. And the very fact that we have state schools facing bankruptcy, and this is something that really has crossed my mind. This sadly is not a surprising factor. There has been little to not enough funding from the Conservatives when it comes to our state schools, and there's actually been a more increase in private school funding, believe it or not, than there has been on state schools, which is why it is so important that when Labour come in, if they do come in to power, that they ensure that more funding gets into state schools as quickly as possible, because it is these kids, these futures that are missing out. And these teachers who are working more than 60 hours off their feet. And why do I say that? Because the work for them doesn't stop in the classroom. They are doing paperwork constantly. It's constantly lots and lots of paperwork. And they have to. It's a lot of work, for them being a teacher. And it's a very stressful job. But they do it because teachers, I would say, don't do it for the money. They do it for the fact that they can teach children of the future, to be able to have that, to play that role in playing a part in the future of the next generation. I think that's a part of it that plays into it when I think of teachers and the work that they do. I don't think of teachers as a way for them to try and make money. I don't see it like that. I see them as a means of caring about education, caring about children's future, caring about making sure that the next generation that moves forward goes on to best and brighter things. And this is an extremely depressing headline, and one we should all be very concerned about, because the longer we are waiting for a general election, the more that this could very much come to pass. So, an unprecedented number of state schools could close due to effective bankruptcy, the leader of the Head Teachers Union has warned. They are facing existential crisis due to lack of government funding and the difficulties in recruiting enough staff, according to Geoff Barton, the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders. Lack of staff as well. Where's the incentive? The pay. My understanding is that the pay is not as good as well. So again, like we've always had this problem with regards to cost of living. Money's just not good enough for people, and in state schools it's no different. He told the there is a very serious risk that some schools will simply cease to be viable based on the current course set by public spending plan. Also have to remember as well, one thing that I remember as well. You guys remember we had the stories about the RAAC, the aeratorial concrete, that's in some of our hospitals. Well, they're also in some of our schools as well. So some schools, because they are in some of our schools, obviously we can't be teaching kids in those buildings or certain parts, because it's dangerous for the kids. So they've had to hire out the state school had to hire out of their budget, not the government, out of their own budgets to get mobile facilities so that they can teach the kids in, because in the buildings that they have, the schools with the autocrad concrete, they can't teach them in it because obviously it's not safe. But that's coming out of the school's budget. So that means that that state schools have even less money to spend as well when it comes to educating their kids. And while the government has said they have worked on some of these schools, there's still a lot that needs to be done on them. These schools and these buildings that they are in, they need to be fixed up to scratch quickly. Need to get up to date now. But the government are not prepared to put their hand in their pocket for your children. Schools and college finances are already under severe pressure, and if the current government's spending plans are implemented over the next parliament, which would effectively be the second age of austerity, we're in deeper trouble, said Mr Barton. Some schools, particularly small primary schools, are also hit by the impact of declining pupil numbers, and it may struggle to keep the doors open at all and could become effectively bankrupt. This is really bad as well, is that some parents are not even. There is some cases of some pupils no longer going into schools, and some kids missing out entirely on education. That's a big issue, and that one that needs to be addressed as well. A lot of parents out there as well just don't have the faith that they have into schools. And again, it's easy to point the finger at the school and the teachers, but it all stems from one place, guys. It all stems from one place. Everything that's happening in this country. If this happens and some of these schools end up having to close, it really would be a serious loss of the facility upon which communities rely, and something we haven't seen happen before on any scale. His analysis has been supported by the Confederation of School Trusts, the CST, which represent many of England's chains and state-funded academic schools. CST Chief Executive Lorna Cruddas said many schools were facing extreme pressures on their budget. We do not believe the current approach to school funding is sustainable, particularly for fixing school buildings, Ms Cruddas told the Eye. The CST's latest National School Trust Survey in 2020 found less than half of the school's trust chief executives said they felt very or quite confident in their trust's financial stability, with 19% saying they were not very or not at all confident, and a fifth of school trusts said they were concerned about the long-term finances. Neil Short, the chairman of the National Association of Small Schools, the NASS, confirmed the shortage of cash, particularly in small rural schools which have just 30, 40 or 50 pupils. The small rural schools, those areas where they have only like one school or whatever, if they go, those kids have nowhere to have an education. Nowhere. And they rely on them. They really, really do. He said small schools were twice as likely to close as the national average, citing researchers by the centre-right think tank Onwards in 2019. Mr Schultz said the government's national funding formula, the NFF, introduced for the academic year of 2018-2019, has not offered the anticipated significant increases in funding for small schools, despite government promises. He said the financial situation for each school varies, but added that there are instances when schools have to close due to being unsustainable. Mr Barton said that any future chancellor would have to revisit the public spending plans because they are so unrealistic. Speaking during one of his final interviews before stepping down as the ASLC leader next week, after 7 years, he added, "There are schools and trusts which are talking of potential bankruptcy." Now, at the moment, the only thing you can do as the head of chief executive, if you haven't got enough money, is to make class sizes bigger, cut certain courses and make certain staff redundant. Those will initially be teaching assistants, but teaching assistants are the very people who work with the most vulnerable children, so they'll be disproportionately be the ones who are most affected by this. And this is the thing, you're cutting out, you take away those teaching assistants, you're cutting out that support for them. Now I'm someone that needed that when I was younger, and I can tell you that those assistant teachers are really crucial in those classrooms, really crucial. They really matter. And trust me, no school wants to do these, but they are being forced. Yeah, they're being forced in these situations. So the Tories haven't understood schools here. So Mr Barton, who had worked with 7 Conservative education secretaries during his 7-year tenure as ASCL General Secretary, he said the biggest failure of Tory leadership during his time has been the failure to understand what schools are being expected to do. They provide social cohesion, gluing communities together, he told the Eye. They can't do that on their own, and yet with the huge reduction of what local authorities can provide and the lack of support through social care or community policing, schools have been expected to do unrealistic amount of works on behalf of children and young people without resorting to their needs. Like I told you, austerity was always going to play a part in everything. Yeah, and it all stems back to the Conservatives and their handling of these things. If we're going to expect a lot from schools, you're going to have to be resourced better if you want better than they've been resourced so far. It's all well and good telling them that to work more for less, but you can only do so much with so little. You can only do so much. And at the end of the day, you're literally killing people when it comes to the workload that you are asking these schools to do. There's only so much they can do before they literally suffer from burnout, and then all of a sudden their mental health comes in, and then they're unable to go back to work. Then that person ends up on the NHS waiting list, yeah, because they need help. Or on the mental health, for example, that person can't get that mental health assistance because our NHS has a massive backlog. So that person is now then claiming benefits. So instead of doing a work at the school, they're now just being stuck at home. Are you seeing a pattern here? Yeah, it all ties together, and it's all tied around austerity. The cutting that the Conservatives done is what's led to this. We need to reverse austerity. We need investment in our state schools. We need investment in rail. We need investment in our public services. We need state investment. Yeah. He added that the government has had an obsession with a narrow curriculum that has squeezed out extracurricular sports, music, and debating. Yeah. This is horrible. Taking away these kinds of lessons like sports, music, these kind of things. These are great, awe-inspiring things for kids, and they're being forced to take these things away to prioritize the main things of maths and English and whatnot. It's just not right. There is a risk of the curriculum narrowing in state education, while private schools can continue to provide a whole range of broadening experiences, he said. Exactly. One rule for them and another rule for other. Because if you've got money in your pocket, you're all right. But if you don't have money in your pocket, your kid has a hard time in their future when it comes to education. And this is partly due to pressures on teachers' workload because staff members no longer have time to take students to sport machines after school or run clubs at lunch. At last in lunch, Mr Barton, who is going to chair the Independent Commission on the Future of Orgy Education, wants to make education matter more to parents who have prevented the looming school crisis. You have to demonstrate that investing in education heads off problems in other areas, criminal justice, social care, he said. All these issues society has to pick up the tab for. And if we get our education system right, then we don't have to pay for that. Exactly. All these things, and reduces the cost, benefits our economy, more money in our pocket, better GDP, grow the economy, all that kind of stuff. It all, like I said, all goes round in circles. But it will need investment, which will need voters to really believe that education matters. Parents should be especially worried about their teachers' recruitment and retention crisis, as it means a lot of classes are being taught by teachers who are not subject specialists, Mr Barton said. Yes, this is another thing as well. So because there is a teacher shortage of crises as well, you're having situations where teachers are being in situations where they are teaching lessons that they're not expertise in. They're being asked to cover a particular lessons or whatever, and they're not a specialist subject so they struggle to teach those children in that in that, which is really damning, and that's not on the teacher, because you can't expect teachers to know about every single subject, everything off the trot sort of thing. So that also plays a factor too. The fact that you've got 400 schools where physics is being taught and they haven't got a physics teacher, that should be really concerning for pupils, he told the Eye. We're asking PE teachers to be teaching maths, but really we need a better long-term solution so that we are recruiting the best graduates to choose from one of the most important jobs there is, which is to education the nation's children and young people. I will, obviously, for anyone who's teachers when it comes to teaching physics, there's lots of ways that they can do that. There's lots of ways that they can teach that, obviously, but a physics teacher would obviously suffice. But if not, perhaps maybe, like again, I would say it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, you could run through. Some teachers could run through a few YouTube videos, and maybe that might give them some ideas that they can do in those lessons. But that would be hypocritical when they're already spending their time going through ravagous amounts of paperwork. But it's an idea and a suggestion that may or may not help. Mr Short has said that some small schools had dealt with funding issues by creating federations, meaning that they can share the same head teacher, staff members and resources to ease the burden. He said he was concerned about the closure of more small schools due to funding issues, but added that each scenario that leads to closures is different and some are better off than others. Mr Barton added, we're looking at schools cutting everything down to the bare minimum, which means you have classes sizes of 30 or more, you don't have any teaching assistants, and you would see schools trying to do their best on the most basic of budgets. This is very, very basic here. And those odd kids in those classes are not going to have that vital one-on-one education. They're not going to have it. This means they're going to miss out. Some of them may have issues that may not be very clear as well. They're going to suffer. It's not right, guys. It's not right. He said it was likely that many schools and colleges would have to make further and very significant cuts to provision. And the thing is, like curriculum options, pastoral support, routine maintenance budgets and classrooms and support resources. The Department of Education spokesperson says, here we go, investment. School funding is raising more than £60.7 billion next year, which will be the highest ever level in real terms per pupil. While the vast majority of schools are operating with a surplus, we are providing up to £40 million in 2023-2024 to support schools which find themselves in financial difficulties. We also recognise the essential role in small schools in rural areas play in their communities, which is why we're providing extra funding for them. Do you think that's making a difference? I don't. I don't buy what this Conservative government is saying. These issues. Do you think the Education Secretary Keegan is actually taking these on board? Do you think she's really taking this on board? No, I don't think so. I honestly don't think they care. I really don't. And our children's futures are suffering because of this. It's so sad. It really, really is. I cover a variety of topics here on this channel, guys, and we're talking about our children's future here. We already know that we have kids in this country who are generally starving, and we have parents who go days without eating so that their children can get food in their bellies. There's stories, obviously, of kids going to school with hungry bellies, with no food because their parents are in a cost of living crisis. And this situation just exacerbates the dying out, the crying out for help right now. They say they've put in all this money in. Well, where is it all going? Where is it all going? Because these schools are not. We know that there have been issues with state schools. We know that the funding has not been enough for these state schools. We know that there's been not enough enough teachers. We know all this stuff, and yet all this is still happening. It's not right. What do you guys think? What do you make of the situation that we're facing? Some of you in your areas are facing similar situations. Maybe you're a teacher yourself and you can tell me your experiences. Let me know your thoughts and more about this story in the comment section down below. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button. We greatly appreciate it. Share it across social media so others are notified of this video. And subscribe, because it really does help support the channel. And if you want to go one step further and financially support me in the work I do here, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member for as little as 99p, or join me on Rumble or Patreon for exclusive content there as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope to catch you all very, very soon.